ecosystem, or to be more exact, creating AI ecosystem. Many countries, Israel is one, are interested in being a real player in the AI game. And for this, we all understand we need not only certain unique capabilities, but the whole ecosystem around. I had the experience of myself, me, together with my colleague, Professor Aviatar Netanya, who is a member, who is going to participate in this panel. We had the pleasure to plan to submit to the government a plan that recommends how to create the ecosystem in Israel. We have here panelists coming from other countries like Britain, Spain, Singapore, and we are all interested in hearing the panel members, hearing the general views about the AI ecosystem, and especially what is unique to their countries. I hope that it will be a useful panel. Thank you all. The next speaker is from Singapore, is Kai-Fong Cheng, who is the second permanent secretary of the Smart Nation and Digital Government Group at the Singaporean government. And we would like to hear, of course, what are the elements of the essential elements of AI ecosystem from the point of view of Singapore. Kai-Fong, please.
Thank you, Prof. So it's first of all, just thank you and hello to everyone, old friends, for inviting me to participate in AI Week. It is a real honor and real privilege to be able to engage with experts all over the world to do this. We in Singapore, of course, with Israel, share many similarities and have a long history going way back. And Itzik is a very old friend of ours. And when you talk about the subject of AI, we see Israel is really one of the few global AI hubs in the world. We admire the fact that you have many deep tech and AI startups. We also like the fact that you have many strong entrepreneurial, you have a strong entrepreneurial culture and spirit. And that's something we really seek to emulate in Singapore. So Itzik asked me to talk a little bit about enablers, ecosystems and enablers. But before I do that, I thought maybe I should start by explaining how Singapore views AI and why in Singapore we've decided to have a national AI strategy. Not just because Israel has one, but really because for three reasons. One, AI is going to be here to stay. It's a general purpose technology. And we think that as a general purpose technology, it can be applied across the board, different sizes of companies, different industries and all that. And there's a potential to offer many breakthrough solutions that would be much better than what we're doing today, whether it's in the terms of optimizing businesses, to optimizing supply chains, to looking at healthcare. So we think you have no choice but to invest in AI because it has such wide-ranging effects. Second reason is we think that AI, and I don't have to convince all of you of this, has a great potential to create a lot of social and economic value for our citizens. If we apply AI properly in some of the provision of public goods, I'm talking about transport, optimizing our transport flows, looking at education. If I look at healthcare, there's real potential in improving lives of our citizens. And secondly, related to that, we believe AI, if adopted at the economy-wide, can raise productivity. If you know Singapore, one of our biggest problems is that we have limited resources. We have limited carbon, we have limited manpower, we have limited land. And we think as the economy digitizes and uses more data, AI provides a very good foundational benefit. And finally, one of the reasons why we need a strategy, and this is the case for governments getting involved, because I know some countries come from the point of view that government should just get out of the way and let the private sector do its thing. But we think there's a role for government to play in just coalescing and organizing and orchestrating how we use AI as a country, because I think the private sector collects a lot of data and continues to collect data and interface with citizens, but so does government. And I think there's a lot of complementarity in data that can be harnessed for good. And both the private sector and public sector need talent, they need infrastructure, they need a set of rules to operate and to thrive. And in Singapore, we have a tradition of a very activist government, and we believe that there's a role for governments to work together, both with researchers as well as with the private sector. And that's why we've made this a national priority. So in my mandate as the permanent secretary, second permanent secretary in the Smart Nation and Digital Government group, one of the areas which I oversee is our national AI strategy. In fact, we have an office called the National AI Office, and we oversee all the way from research to talent development and talent strategy to deploying, working with companies in the industry. And so the whole gamut of just trying to bring all the different AI efforts of Singapore together, both in the private sector and public sector. Now, so Isaac asked me, what are some of the ecosystem enablers? And maybe let me just list out 5 of them, and I go through very briefly in turn, and then we can have a conversation around that. The first one is what I've said earlier, is what we call a triple helix partnership. Now that sounds pretty, jargonish, but essentially it is about partnering, having a close partnership between the research community, the industry, and the government. The research community is important, right? Because AI is science-based, and so we need a very vibrant research community to do foundational research and to be able to create technological breakthroughs. So that's straightforward. I don't need to tell you that. Number 2, industry. Industry is important because who doesn't like to make money, right? And in that sense, having a business use case and having data is very important to make sure that we can anchor research efforts. Businesses also play a very big role in providing a place on an attractive receptacle for AI talent. And they also are able to deploy these technologies through products, through services, to generate social and economic value. Now that's really important because actually most of the times, if you just have a pure, at least if you look at the economy, pure play AI companies will find it very hard to succeed if they don't have a business use case. And so you need that close nexus with a business use case that constantly updates its models, that constantly finds that opportunity to deliver as additional value. And the market test is really important. And finally, government. So the third player is government. And we think government is important because they are often, the market doesn't sort itself out. If it did, everyone will be a banker, or maybe in this case, everyone will be a computer scientist, but you need a fair distribution of talent around. And the government sort of defines priorities and tries to orchestrate and facilitate collaboration across various stakeholder groups. And the government has a role to play in the provision of public goods, including infrastructure, both the hard infrastructure. So just as the government builds roads, the government enforces rules. Likewise, I think in the AI space, the government would have to enforce rules around the use of AI. We'll have to build the infrastructure for AI. And I think the government has a role to play in making sure that where there's market failure, to try to invest in those areas and to try to, and finally, I think even in just talent, right? If government does not provide, if public education does not provide a basic level of STEM, science, technology, math, fundamentals, you're going to have a problem with AI talent. So that's one, which is really this triple helix partnership, this partnership. 2, and very briefly, an enabler will be AI education and talent. So I think, and when I say talent, it's got to be at different levels. So it'll be having a strong core of AI professionals to deep skills. Those are the what I call the Jedi Masters, right? Who are able to develop cutting edge technology. But then you also need workers that actually have a fair understanding of AI. They don't need to be Jedi Masters, but they need to be able to see opportunities to apply AI in their domains. And related to talent, we will also need to attract international talent that can actually bring in new ideas, new capabilities. The third enabler is data. And we need to promote more data sharing, both within the public sector, but also with the private sector. And one of the government's role is to provide that. Fourth, we need a good set of rules, what we call a progressive and trusted environment. Because the danger for government is that we tend to be overly conservative and we constrain. And that actually stifles innovation. So what we want to do is to, we have concepts like the sandbox. We have concepts where we actually have a trusted data sharing with our private entities. And in future, maybe we will be able to apply blockchains in having some sort of a more trustworthy sharing arrangement between both government and private sector. And lastly, on international collaboration, and that's why we are here. And we are very keen to work with companies from the outside, but we're also very, very keen to work with governments, such as our friends here in Israel.
Thank you, Kai-Phong. We don't have a lot of time, so perhaps one short question and short answer. Singapore, like Israel, by the way, is a small country, and you mentioned it and said you are limited in resources and you cannot do whatever China or the United States of America can do, only because of this size.
Yep, for sure.
Still, you aim to be an important player in this AI, global AI game, okay? What is unique, I would say something, what are the unique advantages that you have in Singapore that enable you to believe that you will succeed?
That's a great question, right? Because certainly we don't have the same advantages and same characteristics. So take, for example, China, right? You mentioned China. I mean, just look at the amount of data that they generate every single day, right? And that's one of the reasons I imagine why China companies are such leaders, right? Especially in image recognition. Anything that needs huge amounts of data, brute force AI, and you are able to develop models that actually are way more accurate than what any other. And I don't think Singapore can play that game at all. I think it'd be very difficult. You look at other AI hubs like UK, they've got a very strong financial sector like we do, but because they have a very vibrant financial sector, you see a fintech AI startup ecosystem emerging and lots of private sector investment crowding in. And likewise in Israel, I think cybersecurity and AI sort of come together to some extent. So what's Singapore's game in this? I think Singapore has several advantages. One advantage is the concept of trust. And if you combine that concept of trust, that means the way, and when I talk about trust, it's not just trust in the rule of law. So whatever we say goes, but also the trust that government and companies have with citizens. And if you look at us as a small city, there are many advantages around several use cases. So take, for example, healthcare. We have a healthcare system that's not completely public sector owned, because that would be poor, right? Because if it's only the public sector, without the private sector, there's no innovation. So we have a pretty decent and very good sustainable healthcare system. But because we are such a small country in a very compact space, and we have data in healthcare, this is a great advantage in healthcare. So healthcare is one of the areas where we are trying to apply AI. Because what healthcare needs is not just data, you need clean data. So one of our projects that we have currently going on is this SG 100K. We are tracking, this is a volunteer research project where 100,000 citizens are enrolled on this, track longitudinally across all the different multiple factors, whether it's your heart rate variability, they do blood tests and everything. And then with this data set, you are able to then practice and operationalize it in actual hospital operations. So those are the areas in which we are focusing on, where we think we have strengths.
This last point raises new questions about privacy and issues
exactly.
like that. We don't have time for this. Thank you very much, Kai-Phong. Thank you. Okay, the next speaker is Professor Aviatar Matania, who is the head of the security studies graduate program here at Tel Aviv University. But what is more important here is that Eviatar was the first director of the, at that time we called it National Cyber Bureau, National Cyber Directorate, it is called today, in 2000 and starting in 2012, after the government agreed to a plan which I had the honor to submit to the government to make a revolution in Israel and make Israel one of the top 5 countries in the world in cyber technology. More than this, in 2.5 years ago, in 2018, we were appointed by the same prime minister together now, Professor Matania and me, to do something similar, but this time with artificial intelligence. So he is an expert in both, and please, what can you teach us on the AI national strategy?
Thank you, my colleague, Professor Ben Israel. The desire in generating a holistic plan for Israel in artificial intelligence was because of the understanding that AI is an infrastructure of infrastructures and is going to dominate the high-tech arena in the next decades. And Israel, as an economy and a country that is based on its high-tech, needs to better understand how to approach the whole idea of artificial intelligence, and not just through the industrial perspective, but more from a national point of view. So what we try to do is to answer, I call it 3 major questions. First, what is critical for Israel to be in order to maintain its superiority in the high-tech arena and its ability to have also a very prospering high-tech arena in the next decades? The second question was not just what is critical, but where exactly Israel has advantages over others, where we should focus and put more efforts and budgets in order to be dominant in these fields. And by asking these 2 questions, we need also to emphasize that you didn't ask the question about the all other fields that we may be inside the AI arena. We only wanted to focus on what is critical and the fields where we have advantages. And that's because Israel is a very small country and cannot compete with great powers such as the United States or China, when they can be, of course, dominant in all the fields of AI. We cannot do the same. So we need only to answer the question, where is it critical and where do we have advantages to try and focus on them. And the third question was, okay, having understood exactly where we need to be, what is the right national plan to lead us, to lead Israel into these fields? So in order to answer these questions, we gathered several hundreds of people from all the sectors in Israel, from the industry, the government, security, academia, of course, and try to answer these questions. First, what is critical? Second, exactly where our strengths are, and how we should approach the whole idea, or how to generate and what plan should we generate. Our understandings were that we need to first invest something like 20% out of the current budgets that go to R&D into AI technologies in order to be in the right place in the next several future decades. And to focus our efforts on several, we call it national projects, that in some fields that together may bring us both to, I would call it prospering high-tech AI industry, and also may contribute and benefit the sectors inside Israel. I will give an example. Transportation. In transportation, Israel currently has several high-tech companies and researchers in the academia, and can take the whole issue of transportation into AI and use AI for both generating better transportation in Israel. Since transportation is a big issue in Israel, we are a very crowded country, and also to generate several I would call it AI companies in the field of transportation that can be dominant around the world. And transportation is actually an example. We suggested transportation, healthcare, another field that Israel is quite strong at, and agriculture. And through these three fields, as an example, to both generate more industrial companies in the area of AI, also to succeed in building these sectors inside Israel in a better way. So the whole plan, and I will not go to explain the whole plan because it's very complicated and a long one, was to try and focus on fields and capabilities that Israel can generate in order both to benefit from a better or a dominant AI industry, and to benefit inside the country through the several fields that we decided to focus on.
Thank you. We have here a few speakers from different countries. And one of the question is, what is the difference? I mean, is this AI strategy, can it be implemented everywhere, or is it unique to a different culture or different country? And another one, which is maybe, if you ask me, more interesting, is what is the difference in terms of strategy, of national strategy, between what we have done already in Israel in cyber and what we are in the process of doing in artificial intelligence? Can you, but very shortly, because we don't have too much time.
Yes. So I will start with the second question, which from my point of view also explains the first one. The major difference between cyber and AI is not just that AI is a much bigger market than cyber security, of course, but that in cybersecurity, Israel focused on building an academia and industry, an ecosystem of academia, industry, human capital, which is focused on, I will tell, on export, on the high-tech arena, not influencing the sectors in Israel. Meaning, of course, we need a better cybersecurity everywhere, but the fact that we have a leading cybersecurity industry, one of the most important in the world, does not affect the sectors inside Israel, but only through the contribution to the economy. In AI, what we try to do, what I explained before, is not just to have a leading industry, a dominant one around the world, but also to generate some benefits from this industry to these sectors in Israel, meaning that transportation will be different through AI technologies. Transportation is not different through cybersecurity technologies. Everyone needs cybersecurity all around the world. But here, AI may contribute to our economy, not just from the export point of view, but also to influence the transportation, the agriculture, the way the government works, which is very important and is unlike the cyber ecosystem and the cybersecurity approach. And this also stands in front of the difference between countries around, all around the world in their approach to AI. You may identify countries such as Israel that starts with saying, we want a very strong AI industry, what we call R&D, development of new AI technologies. And Israel also wants to benefit from its use. There are several countries, other countries in the world, that focus and emphasize not the high-tech AI industry, but the use of AI, meaning the strategy is focused on how we will be the best users of AI technologies in our government, in other sectors. We will teach our population how to use data. So they are focused on the use. Of course, the great powers, such as the US, focus both on the use and the R&D. Israel traditionally focused usually on R&D, on its high-tech arena, on the economy, on the national security from the big perspective point of view, and not on the welfare, the use. In AI, what we try to do is to generate a plan where we're not just dominant in the AI industry, but also on the benefit of it to our sectors. And I think that what Israel is trying to do here is to balance between these two. What you will see all around the world is that there are several strategies focused on the R&D and other on the use. I think this is the big idea.
Thank you very much. I would like only to add one thing, is that the more we use AI, the more dependent our society will be on computer technology, and therefore the more vulnerable we will become to cyber attacks. And there is another link between these two subjects. Thank you very much, Eviatar.
Thank you.
The next speaker is Carme Artigas. She is the Secretary of State of Digitalization and Artificial Intelligence of Spain. And of course, she will speak about the ecosystem, the AI ecosystem and strategy, mainly from the point of view of Spain. Please.
So hello, everyone. It is a honor for me to participate today in this AI week representing Spain. And I would like, first of all, to thank Tel Aviv University and especially Professor Ben Israel for inviting me to be part of this global reference meeting in the AI sector and be able to present the vision and the ambitious projects that Spain is already developing in the field of AI. As you all know, we are facing an exciting time full of unique opportunities for economic progress and social progress, and we consider AI as a driver for change. And this is a global context of unprecedented technology development that must place at the service of a more smarter, sustainable, and inclusive model in our economy, in our society. And we see AI really as a driver for economic recovery after the pandemic that will impact not only the production model, but also the society. With this commitment in mind, Spain has already started deploying its national strategy on AI, ENIA. And this is a strategy that has two main axes. One is to develop, of course, academia and scientific excellence in the field of AI. But we also think that the key for that is to integrate AI in the different value chain on the existing economy and the existing industrial models, so that we help our main industries evolve to a really data economy where AI is going to be really a driver. And the second key piece for us is that this cannot be developed at any price. This cannot be developed in any way. It must be under an ethical approach and a human-centered approach. So these two processes are guiding us the way in we are deploying our national strategy. And we have already taken important steps forward. First of all, we have already deployed subsidiaries to help our industry, especially SMBs, in adopting mature AI for productivity and, for example, smart processes and process automation. So that's going to be important to improve efficiency and productivity in our small, medium companies. We are launching also an excellent center of network for academia in order to have multidisciplinary projects in the field of AI involving different centers, private and public, and also the industry. And we have also launched missions, we call it R&D missions for AI, in long-term fields like is sustainability, energy transition, and also in the field of the labor market and all the challenges we have ahead with the future of work. So we have like a long-term perspective, at the same time, short-term perspective. Another important thing we are putting in place is everything related with the deployment of the regulation of European approach on AI. You know that European Commission has already published a proposal for regulation, and Spain has proposed itself as a pilot country to test the regulation before it is into practice. So our idea is to create working groups in which we put in touch legislators with practitioners, and before that legislation comes to force, be able to assess the difficulties of putting that regulation in place in order to have time to make some shifts or some modifications. Because our experience is that sometimes legislators have good intentions, but not everything we legislate at the end of the day is easy to put in practice by companies or by practitioners. So I think it's very innovative to have these working groups. We are already putting a working group ahead. And you know, Spain has been leading very important changes in the legislation, as we are being the first country, for example, imposing transparency in the algorithmic relations between employers and employer, for example, in the platform economy. And we have put that already in a national law. At the same time, we are putting in a law the fact that you can pay in money or pay in data. So we are very innovative on this legal field as well. And we consider that algorithm transparency in all the future economic relationships is going to be very important. So we are already putting in place working groups in auditing algorithms, and all this work will be shared with the European Commission to have some lessons learned that can probably be useful for the future regulations. Our previous experience on the GDPR showed us that sometimes it's very costly for small and medium companies to adopt to the new regulation, and we don't want this to happen in the AI field. Another thing when we consider it's important for the development of AI, and you mentioned the word ecosystem, and I agree. The word ecosystem is very important. We need an ecosystem for data, an ecosystem for high capability of computing. We need an ecosystem of research and innovation, and also on entrepreneurship. And this is why we are promoting entrepreneurship in the field of deep tech and deep science with a new venture capital fund with 4 billion euros of investment, public and private money. We call it the Next Tech Fund, which is aiming to help companies in the scale-up phase that develop AI solutions in the field of deep tech and deep science, so that we really cross AI with other fields in a multidisciplinary approach. We consider AI is not a technology by itself, which it is, but also is an enabling technology in other fields like healthcare and new materials, and also climate change. So the aim of this fund is to really boost the capacity of Spain to develop future unicorns, because we assist them not only in the early stage phases, that is where traditionally the VC funds have really covered the need, but they are not covering the need on the scale-up phases, and this is why we are raising this big 4 billion euro of public-private fund. And I mentioned also the computing capabilities, and Spain has already launched the project Quantum Spain, which is the first we aim to be really the first quantum supercomputer ecosystem for South Europe. And we have already located the first 20 million. We are aiming to put at least 60 million euros for public investment that we expect to match with private investment. And we are already in place on launching this ecosystem that will involve more than 24 centers of development all over Spain. So as you mentioned, it is important to have AI, but without capacity of computing and especially data, AI has a short run. So we need to talk about data. And the important factor is that we encourage also the traditional systems and the traditional industries in shared data. We are very active participating in Gaia X initiative at European level. We have opened the national charter. And with this national charter, we are to promote European industrial spaces in key sectors. And the first one in which we are leading at European level is the industrial space for tourism. tourism is one of the most important industries for our country, and we expect that this tourist industry also works in the way that we are sharing data and we're sharing intelligence to make it more innovative and more competitive. So this is why we have already put in place this important initiative. And last but not least, we are doing a lot of very important steps towards the developing an AI industry for Spain and Latin America in Spanish language. I think we have a unique asset, which is our language that is being spoken by 600 million people in the world, including Israel. And I think that is where we can also build some competitive advantage. We don't want to end, I don't want to end without recalling in this regard that Spain is very committed with its Charter of Digital Rights, a Charter of Digital Rights that aims for this human-centric and ethical development of AI, where the citizens are not only consumers, but are important agents in the governance of what AI should be in the future. And we don't want that any technology development needs to be paid against the civil rights, the digital rights, as the same way we have it in the real world. We don't think that we should miss in the process some important rights as mature, I would say, democratic societies that we have taken centuries to conquer. And in this Charter for Digital Rights, we have a special focus on the rights around AI and neuro technologies. So we say that nobody can be discriminated by an algorithm. And that's something we should guarantee by law. And it should be deployed in many aspects. I mentioned recently the aspect on the labor relations, but there are many other aspects where we should guarantee that AI is not discriminated a single person. So this discussion around digital rights and the discussion around how this should be ensured in an AI environment is something we have put in the agenda of the future OECD Digital Economy Ministerial Conference that we have managed to be organized in Canary Islands in December 2022. So we want to put into that important conference the priority that we all agree that the development of AI technologies must have an ethical component and that we need to include the digital rights in the process. So just was the first ideas I wanted to share with you. Thank you very much for this opportunity to share with you the vision. And I think that we are all aligned in the sense that AI can be very profitable as long as we put it at the service of the social progress and the welfare of all of us. So thank you very much.
Thank you. One question, if I may. You mentioned, on one hand, you mentioned exotic technologies like quantum computing, which of course, the more powerful computers we will have, the more AI capabilities we will be able to develop. And on other hand, you mentioned tourism or traditional, you called it industry, okay? Industries which are not so much involved in developing in R&D or something like this, but more in applications and using whatever AI can offer, analyzing big data, etc. How, if I can ask you, let's say 5 years from now, Spain, how do you see Spain in this multi-dimensional AI world, okay, 5 years from now? More on the development side or more on the application side, or both?
We aim for both. We are ambitious, but of course, let's be realistic. We have prioritized, I would say, 5 important industry sectors where we consider AI can really boost for productivity and innovation. And these 5 sectors are very important for our economy. And we can think that they can become like engines for growth, and they can like have a pulling effect of the rest of the ecosystem. One is intelligent tourism. The other is digital health. Then it's what we call agro-tech, so agro-food and technology, so the applications of technology and AI in the field of agro-food, and also sustainable mobility. So these four key sectors are sectors where we are together with some important initiatives that we are leading thanks to the recovery funds of the European Union that, as you know, are bringing to Spain potentially 140 million euros for the digitalization and the transformation of the economy. So we consider that these are the most important sectors where AI can really bring value and an increase in productivity, competitiveness, innovation, but also creating quality jobs. So these are very important sectors. For example, some of the strategic projects at the national level, like the future electronic vehicle, each of these sectors will have a national data sharing space when we will support that transformational project with data and AI. So we consider that in each of these verticals, we need to deploy data sharing capabilities, high performance computing capabilities, and AI knowledge involving academia, private and public sector. And on the more basic field, our bet is in two important sides. One, as I mentioned, we want to lead the development of AI tools in a Spanish language. That is a unique value we have as a country. We have very close relations with Israel, but of course, Latin America. We have 600 million potential users. And since we see AI more and more in the human-machine interaction, in healthcare, in helping, we call it in the economy of care, like the economy of caring, more and more aged population that will require remote health services. We need that this AI technology thinks and speaks in Spanish, because behind a language, there's a way to see the world. There are principles and values, and we don't see that only led by English-speaking countries. So that's really a bet, and we are putting a lot of money, public money on that, and we consider that we can develop an important industry on creating an important corpus of tools that can be used by any industry, and especially deploying solutions in the field of healthcare and human interaction. And the other bet, which is not important in terms of economic amount, but it's important and because it's very significant, is that we want to lead the development of green algorithms. The concept of green algorithms is supporting a national plan for green algorithms, in which we are saying that we don't need to, I would say, take care of the environment at the end of the value chain. We don't need to be worried that at the end of the day, that algorithm is processed in a computer in a data center that is fed by sustainable energy sources, and it's not irradiating CO2 or heat. Why don't we solve it in the early stage of the value chain? Why don't we solve it by design? So we want to promote the research on the field of AI algorithms that are green by design. So our aim is that if we deploy a blockchain, that blockchain is a green blockchain. So the efficiency rate is positive. There have been some papers recently of the excessive energy consumption costs of natural language processing techniques. And that is a field we want to focus on, the natural language processing techniques that are important for the field we want to develop on AI in Spanish are efficient by design. So I think that's also a trend that we can also share with the rest of the world, together with this human-centric and ethical approach on the technology development in general.
Thank you very much. I fully agree with your last point. I would say, by the way, I would say green and secured. This should also be by design from the beginning, but I could spend hours talking about it, and unfortunately our time is limited. Thank you, Carmen, for participating in this conference.
Thank you for this opportunity, and I hope everybody enjoys the conference. We'll be very listening to the conclusions, and I hope we can learn from the others as well. Thank you so much.
The next speaker is Sana Karangani, who is the head of the UK Government Office for Artificial Intelligence, and she would tell us whatever they think in Britain about the AI ecosystem. Please, Sana.
Thank you very much, Professor, and thank you very much for inviting me to speak as part of this. As the professor said, I head up the UK Government's Office for AI, which is the central policy and delivery team focused on driving uptake of AI technologies across the wider economy. We are a joint unit sitting between the Department for Digital and the Department for Business. We started out in 2018 delivering the actions that were set out in the AI sector deal, which was a near £1 billion commitment by government, academia, and industry. The sector deal set out 5 foundations that we continue to see as important parts to create a successful and rewarding AI ecosystem. These consist of ideas. So we want the UK to be the world's most innovative economy. People, we want to invest in the next generation of AI talent because good jobs equals greater earning power for all. Infrastructure, data is the fuel for AI, and we want to enable data sharing that is scalable and portable to stimulate AI technological innovation, but also access to compute and other types of infrastructure as well. Business environment, we want the UK to be the best place to start and grow a business. And finally, places, which is we believe that an AI ecosystem should benefit every region of the UK, but also be available to every region of the UK. Last September, following the work that we had done on the sector deal and the number of deliverables that we had accomplished in the sector deal, we published a national AI strategy. This was really to further strengthen the UK's position as a leading AI nation. We wanted to set out how we could ensure that every region of the UK has the skills, understanding, and opportunities to benefit from AI technologies. The strategy is a bold 10-year vision, and it's centered around 3 main pillars. The first one is about continuing to nurture and grow that ecosystem that we were speaking about. So how do we continue to grow access to skills and access to data and access to funding and R&D and access to the right levels and types of infrastructure? The second pillar is about making AI more perverse throughout the economy. So outside of the sectors that are using it already, but actually into the more traditional sectors, making sure that every sector across the economy is benefiting from the positives that these technologies offer. And the third pillar of the strategy is about getting the national and the international governance of AI right, to not only encourage innovation and investment, but to protect the public and our fundamental values. And I'll come back to that a little bit later. So the strategy is really there to give us an opportunity to reinvigorate our international cooperation amongst our research and innovation institutions, to work closely with our partners to use the power of AI to tackle global challenges head on. We look forward and continue to work alongside our international partners through multilateral fora to support the development of the rules around the use of AI for the benefit of our economies and societies. I wanted to touch a little bit on the kind of rules we need to get right in governance of AI technology. This is an incredibly important part of this formula. The strategy that we published is committed to developing a pro-innovation approach to regulating and governing AI, and that protects the public and our fundamental values. And new and clear regulations for AI will improve our perception of the technology and mitigate any new risks without stifling innovation. And public perception of these technologies is a huge, huge barrier to seeing them more perverse across the economy. And regulation and getting our head around getting the right regulation for AI helps with that public perception. But it's also important for us to reflect that regulation is not the only way. We should be looking at the wider kind of AI governance, including technical standards, assurance, and institutions with appropriate oversight. All of these are areas where the UK has experience. So I'm delighted to inform you that we've already taken a number of steps around this. We published an algorithmic transparency standard for the public sector. This move makes the UK one of the first countries in the world to develop a national algorithmic transparency standard, strengthening the UK's world leadership in AI governance. The standard is being piloted by several public sector organizations already, and we will be iterating on the standard based on the feedback that we get. Another is that we just published a roadmap to an effective AI assurance ecosystem. So this is a set like an audit or certification tool. It helps AI users to know that tools are effective, trustworthy, and legal. It's a key deliverable of the strategy, and it will help the UK build a world-leading AI assurance ecosystem in the UK, which we actually also see as a multi-billion-pound industry in its own right. And finally, we launched last month, middle of last month in January, the Alan Turing Institute, who is the UK's National Institute for AI and Data Science, piloting the AI Standards Hub. This is about kind of expanding the UK's international engagement and thought leadership on technical standards. And last but not least, the strategy committed to government publishing a white paper later this year, setting out the UK's own approach to AI regulation. We want to ensure that AI technologies are developed and deployed in the UK, that they both transform the economy and improve lives, but they also have the right rules and regulations to direct, so that we have the right rules and regulations to direct the development of AI in a responsible way. The UK has a large and growing AI ecosystem, and AI technologies and application offer an enormous opportunity to our economy. And so we need to provide clarity on how we plan to govern these technologies so that we can allow innovative businesses and AI developers to continue to transform our economy with confidence, not only for us in government, but for the whole of the public.
Thank you, Sana. One question maybe, if I may, about data sharing. We all know that by using AI algorithms, and if we have, and nowadays we have data sets, digital data sets, we can learn alone. The machine can help us learning along from correlating one data set with another data set, and there are many examples. But there is one problem here, which is really about human nature. I mean, people don't like to share information, and it's not so simple many times to force them to share it, because there are issues of values here and privacy and things like this. It all started, the technology started with science, and science was developed some 400 years ago by Isaac Newton in Britain and other colleagues in Europe. And he was inspired, Newton, by Lord Bacon, who said knowledge is power. When he said knowledge is power, he meant knowledge about laws of nature will give us power to control nature, okay, to cope with nature. But today, we interpret it in a much wider way. We don't want to give up knowledge because we think that knowledge is power in a different sense. And this is a huge problem when it comes to AI, because AI is based on crossing information from different data. How can a government cope with this without, of course, breaking the system of values and forcing people to do what we don't want to do? Can you elaborate on this?
Yes, I can try. I think it's an excellent question, and one that in the UK government, we have an entire directorate dedicated to trying to help find these answers. And we've published the National Data Strategy and opened it for consultation. We are now looking at the responses and coming back with the plans to deliver against that strategy. Within it include exactly addressing these kinds of questions. So not only how does government open its own data sets in a way that allows the economy to flourish and these technologies to flourish and the country to be more innovative, which is one of the benefits of having an AI ecosystem, but also to be able to do that internally in itself within government, because there's a huge amount of use in government being able to access the data it itself has. So how do we ensure that the data the government has is ready, available, useful? Not just to share with the economy, but also to use itself for making its own public services better. So those are definitely questions that we take very seriously. And as I said, we have huge teams dedicated to solving these problems and looking at them. From our side, we have been looking at, if we take for granted and say that, you know, when data is ready and it's in the right shape and form and can be shared, so we've kind of bypassed all of those questions, that the hard part we've left to colleagues to answer. We've looked at, how does this data then get shared between organizations? So how can organizations share their data, pool their data together in a data common or some other data sharing mechanism to allow for things such as the circular economy to work better, so that you can, you know how much food is being put into the system, then you can alert kind of organizations down the line, like rubbish collection and recycling, to know kind of what's coming through, and so that you can create a much more efficient circular economy. Or, for example, keeping different controls internationally, allowing them to share data in a way that allows the trafficking of illegal merchandise or from country to country to be moving across these borders, right? So it allows the solving of very kind of big problems. And we've done a number of studies on this with, we did one study in 2019 with the Open Data Institute on data sharing mechanisms, and the Open Data Institute has taken that work forward, and they are continuing to publish their findings on how to make these mechanisms and how to create these mechanisms with features that allow replicability across internationally and across industries, right? So that you don't have to use contractual means to share your data, but you actually can have a means to kind of do this data sharing on a non, so it's non-specific to a sector or to specific organizations. So we've been looking at, you know, different facets of this problem. And it's been fascinating. But yes, data is an incredibly important factor in getting innovation to work well.
Thank you. And if you find a way to overcome this strong power of nature, I mean human nature, and tempt people to share data, please tell us all. Thank you very much.
You're right, Professor. I wish I had the answer for the human nature question, but what I can say is that there is a lot of multilateral organizations working together to help answer these questions. And one of them is some really, really interesting projects happening within the Global Partnership on AI. These are collaborations between the UK and Canada, talking about data sharing and how to answer some of these fundamental questions. So whilst I can't answer it, I do hope, and I know that there are some incredible experts out there who are trying to get to the bottom of this and provide the right incentives across the board to allow this data sharing to happen for the better of all of us.
Thank you.